Everybody, good morning. Welcome to our webinar on supporting prematurely born children in the preschool years. We've got a fantastic lineup for you this morning. Today's session will be recorded and we'll be sharing edited highlights later in the summer, but we are delighted that you've all been able to join us live this morning. My name is Katrina Ogilvie. I'm the founder and director of the Smallest Things Premature Baby Charity. And I'd like first to go over who else will be visiting today. We can't really think about the needs of children as they grow up without setting the scene. So first of all, I'm delighted to introduce Emily, clinical specialist occupational therapist from Sensory Beginnings. We'll then be hearing from Professor Samantha Johnson about the educational outcomes of children born prematurely. And then moving on to the exciting bit, the development of a new PRISM module specifically focused on the early years. And importantly, how settings can become Prem Aware. And we'll be ending today's session with two lived experiences. Firstly, from Erin Blessett, who is a Prem Aware ambassador, her reflections as an early years practitioner, and then from Melissa, who is mum to Oscar, about the parent perspective. I'm delighted to hand over to Emily, clinical specialist occupational therapist from Sensory Beginnings, who's going to talk to us about how those early starts in the neonatal unit can shape the experiences for children born preterm.
Thank you.
Let me stop sharing. Sorry, there we go.
That's it. Thank you, my love. That's perfect. So hopefully you can all see this. So yes, so exactly. So we're just going to have a little look at the early start in the neonatal unit. And for me, the easiest way to think about it is through our senses, because we can't do anything in life without our senses. So we connect with others, we regulate, we form new relationships, we access the school curriculum through our senses. And this is just to remind you all, although I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, we have 8 senses. We have 5 senses that we hear about in school. So touch, taste, smell, hearing, and vision. And then for the last 100 years, we've also known that we have 3 other senses. So we have proprioception, which is the receptors are in our muscle joints and spindles and capsules, and it enables us to bring our glass to our mouth without throwing it all over our face. We have vestibular system, which is our movement sense and is being fired on the whole time by gravity. It tells us when we're moving and when we're static. And then lastly, we have interoception, and this is the one that everyone's very excited about right now, but that's how you feel internally. So how you feel, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Do you need to have a bowel movement? How do you feel emotionally? And so we'll just have a little look at these 8 senses in the neonatal unit. So if I introduce you to Blake, who is on the right hand side, and Blake was born at 24 weeks and 4 days, and his mother has very kindly shared with us some of her experience on the neonatal unit and helped us wonder if we continue to make things better. So let's just have a little look at the sensory experiences on the left hand side. We're designed to develop in 360 degrees of fluid. We have lovely lanugo hair on our skin, so when the mother walks along, the amniotic fluid stimulates that lanugo hair and gives that fetus a full body massage. Proprioception is flexed and tucked and to the middle, and that is designed so that when you grow up, you can keep yourself calm, you can write, you can do your shoelaces, everything is in the middle. From a movement sense, you feel movement as your mother walks along, but you get very little gravity until the end of that last trimester. Taste and smell, we call together in the womb chemosensory, because it's air molecules that are going to separate that. You're tasting and swallowing the amniotic fluid, which is a predominantly sweet flavour and is influenced by what the mother eats. That last trimester in the womb, you are swallowing 750 millilitres of fluid every day. So not only are you getting these lovely tasting experiences, but it's a proprioceptive experience, sucking. So sucking is going to be really calming for all humans for the rest of our lives. So if any of you who've got children who come out of school with their jumpers sucked to pieces, you don't say, oh my gosh, I've got to go and buy another jumper. You say, amazing, you worked hard today and you focused well. From a hearing point of view, you can hear the amniotic fluid, the mother's heartbeat, her digestive system. The noise isn't sudden and unexpected, and the mother's voice is going to be the primary sound. And we do know that from 28 weeks gestation, you can tell the difference between your mother's voice and your father's voice. And whatever language you hear in utero is the language you prefer at birth. Vision, it is dark. Towards the end of that last trimester, you're going to start to perceive some daylight, which is going to help with your circadian rhythms. And from an interoceptive point of view, everything is met. You're not experiencing any pain. You're with the person who loves you the most. We haven't got to have a clever person working out how much fluid to go into you. Everything is on tap. And then if we compare that to Blake's picture here, we have flipped every single one of those 8 senses. And if we flip every single one of those 8 senses, we can't then be surprised when things are turning out a little bit differently. So you're probably all very familiar with this slide. This is from the work of Terry Inder and Bobby Pineda in St. Louis in USA, but it's a beautiful way at looking at brain development. So we know that you're viable at 22 weeks gestation in the UK. And this picture here of this 25-week brain is a smooth gelatinous substance. It's got to do all its migration, proliferation, myelination, cortical folding. It has to get increased in weight by 400%. It's going to do the same from term and to adult. So everything that is happening on the neonatal unit is impacting on brain development. So gone are the days where we're just focusing on keeping little people alive. We are focusing massively now on the development, and we have recognized that the single biggest influence on development are parents. And so parents being able to be present requires a heck of a lot, because it's the most stressful, financially exhausting place that you can be. And so as a society, we probably need to keep changing how we're looking at neonatal practices. There's a really short story about the experiences of having her baby on the neonatal unit. So I'll just read them here. Firstly, what an experience it was giving birth to such a tiny human at 24 weeks and 4 days. And I gave birth to Blake all natural. Once Blake was born, all I could see was a room full of doctors and nurses. And as I lay in my bed, I watched his tiny body being lifted over my head by the nurses to the resuscitation area. After what felt like a lifetime, I saw Blake's tiny little head and body surrounded with pure white blankets and a little hat. The doctor asked if I wanted to touch Blake, and at the time I didn't think I was allowed, as everything looked so clinical and clean. I was able to touch his small nose and small head, and I took a photo on my phone, which at that time I cherished so much. As I couldn't have a cuddle on my chest straight away, I felt that had been taken away from me, and I felt robbed. Blake was then whisked downstairs to the neonatal unit. Later on that night, I saw him for the first time properly. I sat with him 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. And as we were separated by the incubator, all I could do was hold his tiny hands and look at him covered in wires and under a blue light. Unfortunately, due to the wires, that was our day-to-day life for some time. So I did feel a lot of jealousy, especially when I'd see other mums holding their babies, and all I could do is look at mine and have containment holding, which was nice, but not the same as a proper hold of your child. I had to wait 11 days until his line was removed, until we had our first skin to skin. It felt so special, and he was so tiny. Our first cuddle lasted around 4 hours. It was at that time I felt I could be a mum to him, feel his warmth, and in return, he could feel and hear my heartbeat, giving him a sense of security. So I'm so grateful to Blake's mother, Eleanor, for writing this, but I think it's such a beautiful reminder of how we connect through our senses. She talks about seeing, touching, the warmth. And just to reiterate, it really highlights so strongly that we've got to make things better, because you are not meant to be separated from your child. We are not little horses. We do give birth and go galloping off into the distance. We give birth and we're meant to be held in the loving arms of our parents. And as she said, I had to wait 11 days until his line was removed, until we had our first skin to skin, our first cuddle that lasted 4 hours. And it was at this time I felt like I could be a mum to him, feel his warmth, and in return, he could feel and hear my heartbeat, giving me such a sense of security. And I read that again because that is interoception. And if we look at the adult preemie network, a lot of what people are saying their main difficulty is interoception, is knowing when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, how you feel emotionally. And so again, if we can support prolonged uninterrupted skin to skin, that is what we need to do. So I just wanted to say, like, it's not all doom and gloom. There's things that we can do in each of these areas. So from an interoceptive point of view, we want to really think about zero separation, and not just saying it, but thinking about the big financial implications and the practical implications for that as well. For tactile, again, skin to skin is going to be the answer for all of them, but hand hugs, introducing massage from 32 weeks and up. That's not just for the infant, that's also shown to be brilliant for the parents as well. You get a dose of happiness through massage, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. From proprioception, we want to be supporting flexion, comfort, and alignment. We want to be evaluating how the babies are sleeping and read their behavioral cues so that we can support good musculoskeletal alignment. From a vestibular point of view, we want to be supporting babies to be moved in a flexed, tucked position on their sides or on their tummy. From 32 weeks and up, we want to consider introducing slow movement from the parents based on the baby's cues. Smell, parental smell is amazing. And any of you who've had your own baby, when you smell the top of your baby's head, it's the best feeling in the world. And that's because the baby's going to release these pheromones that's going to give the parent a dopamine hit. So supporting parents to smell their babies and skin to skin, but also providing bonding squares. Babies need to smell their parents, parents need to smell their babies. None of us should be wearing aftershave or perfume. Taste, so giving opportunities for early breast milk. There are some lovely projects out there that look at milk drops, at providing positive taste experiences rather than plastic and alcohol gel the whole time. Hearing, we need to speak, those of us working on the neonatal unit, we need to speak with our library voices, but parents need to talk to their babies. And it's reading books or just telling them about your family and your life. But for language to develop, we need to hear the spoken word. And lastly, vision, our last sensory system to develop. We will be protecting the baby's incubators from 32 weeks and below, because your eyelid is very thin and your pupil doesn't constrict. And then gradually we'll be providing cot canopies and natural light. And then that takes us on to where Blake is now. So Blake is now 3 years old. And so again, his mother's given us a little bit of a catch up and written me a story. And then we have some suggestions for early years and nursery schools as well. So Blake's sensory needs pretty much started off as soon as we introduced him to the wonderful world of weaning. And actually, we see that quite a lot. Families will do incredibly well. And then around that 6-month mark, sometimes challenges do occur. But for Blake, his family did have a whole lot of issues as well, which he'll tell you. It was a bit tricky with Blake because he did start off well and he enjoyed his purees and his yogurts and the usual melty snack. However, just before he turned 1 year old, we became homeless and our world flipped upside down in more ways than one, especially when it came to Blake and his eating habits. And just to stop for 1 second there is a wonderful charity in America called Sour's Light, and Kimberly Novid is the co-founder of it. And she does a beautiful presentation where she says, neonatal care was the single hardest thing that I have ever done in my whole life. And I had a house, a job, a partner, and a family. And for so many of our families, that's not a given. And so the huge amount of stress that everybody is under should never be underestimated. Back to Blake's story. Unfortunately, we were in a situation we had no way of keeping fresh food, and we had to often have takeaways or meal deals, whatever was available to us really, as we didn't have any cooking facilities where we were staying, and that lasted for 6 months. So with this situation, Blake became really accustomed to the beige, crunchy diet. He won't eat anything wet, no yogurt, no wet dishes. And whenever I cook for a family meal, I'd always encourage him to our food. However, daily it gets thrown on the floor or he just doesn't want it. So I have to offer the alternative crunchy food, chicken nuggets, chips. He won't entertain any vegetables or fruit due to the texture. At nursery, they also offer a wide range of variety of food, and he will not entertain anything. So as at home, they also offer an alternative. Blake has taken a liking to eating non-food items as well over the last few weeks. So the foam from his bedding, the wood from his cot, most recently the wall in his bedroom. And I've noticed he will go up close to a wall and dig his teeth in or drag his teeth into the wall so he can bite off a chunk. And he will chew on bark from the floor and try to put big stones in his mouth. He also has a lot of other sensory sensitivity around particularly his head and face. He won't entertain his teeth being brushed. He'll try to push you away. It's also the same with his hair. He flinches if you get too close. And this, she feels, all comes from his traumatic experience on the neonatal unit. And it just really helps us to think about what we're doing. And sometimes we have so many things that we're thinking of, but actually pulling a tape off quickly is not going to help anybody. And so we really need to slow everything down and provide sensory informed care. And then just to think about nurseries and how we can help. Blake and his mother are working with some really good teams right now, and that's going to be a whole beautiful talk about how we can help. But just to give you some practical strategies, the first thing to do is think sensory. So if we are in high levels of stress, and this will be the same for any of you, you don't have to have a specific diagnosis for this, but when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, you feel everything more. So you'll hear things more, smell things more, the labels in your clothes will bother you more. So it is massively about helping people feel calm. And sometimes when we say the word sensory, we sometimes want to bombard the world with all the sensory input. And sometimes less is more. And thinking about what was it like in the womb? Because those sensory qualities help you stay calm for the rest of your life. Flexion, comfort, alignment, hands to mouth, having something to suck, dark. It doesn't matter how old you get. You all go back to your beds at the end of the night into your little womb-like spaces. So we think sensory and we can look at environment. So maybe you need to have a corner in the nursery that has a little womb-like space and that has that nice beanbag that's going to tuck you into that calming position. We need to think about routines, and not just a beautiful routine for the whole day, but really breaking down activities into micro routines. It's kind of like easy to think about the most babushka dolls and thinking about the tiniest one to start with. So when you're learning to brush your teeth, it might be as simple as learning that the toothpaste goes on the toothbrush and then building it up to the whole morning routine, to the whole day routine. Use visuals. That can really help so many children, even those children who have the most amazing language. Visuals enable you to plan for change, and so they give someone a bit of a forewarning. If you were expecting playtime to happen at 10 o'clock and suddenly it's at 10:30, we can provide a visual that forewarns that. Appropriate language. And honestly, I'm the worst at this one. I use way too much language, and I'm learning from my speech and language therapy colleagues, but less is definitely more at times. So slow everything down and to give everyone time to pause to process what's being said. And then motivators are hugely important. Just because something has meaning to you, it does not mean it'll have meaning to anybody else. And so if we can add motivators into some routines as well, that can be incredibly helpful. So just to finish off there, I just wanted to say, just to summarize, that humans only function because of their senses. Like if we didn't have senses, we would be slugs on the ground. It's through our senses that we connect, share, move, learn, adapt. And we learn sensory processing through our parents. So providing opportunities for connection and relationships with parents at the very first moment of life is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That is in just 20 minutes, such a comprehensive overview, and that you came in right on time as well, but really setting the scene for not just what these children born prematurely go through in their early start to life, but also the families as well, and the importance of getting that care right from the very start, and really helpful tips and information for early years settings, thinking about when these children do leave the safety of their homes and their parents, and childcare providers do take them into their care. So thank you, Emily. Emily will be around for a little bit longer, so if there's specific questions, please do put in the chat box, and hopefully Emily will be able to ask some of those a little bit later through the morning. I'm going to hand over now to Professor Samantha Johnson, who's going to talk to us about the learning and educational outcomes of children born prematurely. Sam, I will hand over to you and let you do the introductions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just going to check, Katrina, you can see my slides okay?
I can see your slides absolutely perfectly.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. It's amazing that so many people are willing and ready to learn more about prematurity and supporting children and families in the early years. So thank you so much for joining us. So I've got 20 minutes this morning, and it's my job to, as a developmental psychologist and someone who's been researching what happens to premature babies as they grow up for over 20 years, to explain a little bit about how premature birth can affect children's learning and development. So to do this, I'm going to be giving you some key facts and figures about prematurity, and also summarise really briefly what we know about the impact of premature birth on children's cognitive development, their social and emotional development, and their outcomes at school. And I'm also going to touch really briefly on the impact that premature birth can have on parents and carers, as this is also so important for supporting families in the early years. So I've got the research bit, so I am going to be showing a number of graphs or figures for those of you who are more interested in the numbers and the data. If you are less so, just listen and I will explain everything. So just to begin, what do we mean by preterm birth? Well, I'm sure you know that a typical full-term pregnancy will last around 40 weeks of gestation, so between 37 and 41 weeks of gestation, and that's what term babies would be defined as. Babies that are born before 37 weeks of gestation are referred to as preterm, so it's this orange group on this figure here. And in the UK, around about 8% of babies are born preterm. So this equates to about 53,000 babies born preterm each year in the UK at present. But we often subdivide this group of preterm babies into smaller groups depending upon their degree of prematurity at birth. And this also relates to the degree of neonatal intensive care they might need, and also to their longer term outcomes. So we have late and moderately preterm born babies who are born at 32 to 36 weeks of gestation. And this is the biggest group of preterm births. So these are the babies or children you are most likely to come into contact with. We have very preterm babies born before 32 weeks of gestation, and a smaller subgroup of extremely preterm babies who are born before 28 weeks of gestation. And we now know that babies who were born at 22 and 23 weeks of gestation are starting to survive in increasing numbers here in the UK. And these babies, particularly extremely preterm, can be so vulnerable at birth and require a good deal of intensive care to survive. And that's why we often hear about these miracle babies that have survived to discharge home from neonatal care. But leaving NICU often isn't the end of the story for many of these babies. And we know that from research, there can be long-term consequences of preterm birth. So we know that premature birth can affect children's development in multiple areas, and that these children are at higher risk for a whole range of developmental problems or difficulties later in life compared with children who are born at term. Not a huge amount of children will have severe difficulties, but they may have difficulties in many areas which can be more subtle, but which combined can have quite an impact on children's everyday life. Most of our research is focused on children or babies who were born very preterm, but in fact we know that effects of prematurity may be seen after birth at all preterm gestations. So even those babies who were born just a few weeks early at late or moderately preterm gestations can be at higher risk for difficulties than children born at term. But what we know for sure from the research is that the risk of difficulties later in life is associated with a baby's gestational age at birth. So put simply, this means the earlier a baby is born, the greater the risk of difficulties longer term. And where problems are present, they are often evident in infancy and in the preschool or early years, in the first few years of life, and they may persist through to adulthood. While only a small proportion of preterm children will have severe difficulties or disabilities such as blindness or deafness or cerebral palsy, preterm born children are much more likely to have cognitive or social emotional difficulties than physical difficulties. And these are shown here. The most common cognitive or social emotional difficulties are shown in this figure here. And I'm just going to go very briefly through each one of these. So we know that children born preterm are more likely to have working memory difficulties than children who are born at term. And working memory can be thought of as a mental notepad that can be used for storing information in mind for a short period of time whilst thinking about another task. So, for example, keeping in mind a list of instructions whilst carrying out each step. And children with working memory difficulties may appear as though they're not paying attention, or they may struggle to follow instructions, particularly where there are multiple steps. Children born preterm, on average, also have slower processing speed than children born at term. And processing speed can simply be thought of as the time it takes to perform mental tasks. So this means that children who are born preterm may need little longer to read or to comprehend instructions or to complete a task they are working on. We also know that children born preterm might have poor fine motor skills or difficulties with visuospatial processing or hand-eye coordination. And of course, you will know these skills are really important for lots of areas of development in the early years, for getting involved in activities and games, and for sitting, learning to write, using scissors, drawing or copying. We also know that later on, children born preterm are more likely to have learning difficulties than term-born children, particularly in mathematics. Alongside this, children born preterm are also more likely to have difficulties with attention or concentration than term-born children. So they may have difficulties paying attention whilst doing activities or difficulties following instructions, and they may appear forgetful or easily distracted. They're also, on average, at higher risk for ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, than term-born children. And interestingly, where preterm children have ADHD, this tends to be related to problems with attention and less so with hyperactivity or impulsivity, in the same way that other children with ADHD tend to present. And so this means that attention difficulties can be particularly prominent. Whilst only a small proportion of preterm children will have a diagnosis of ADHD, many more may have difficulties with attention. And finally, we know that preterm born children are more likely to have social and emotional problems. So they tend often to be anxious or withdrawn, particularly in new situations, or may appear fearful or worried or sad. And they also have difficulties with social interaction and communication with others. And as a group are more likely to have autism spectrum disorder than children born at term. Again, only a small proportion will have a diagnosis of autism, but many more preterm children may have social or communication difficulties than term-born children. And this may lead to difficulties in making or maintaining friendships or becoming isolated at school. And we do know that preterm children are more likely to be bullied than children who are born at term. Alongside this, I think it's important to note that in many studies, we see there's often no increased risk of externalizing behaviour problems. So preterm children tend not to be more aggressive or delinquent or disruptive than term-born children. So there's not a particular area of difficulty for these children. But what it does mean is that combined with the other kinds of social and emotional and cognitive difficulties, these children, when they reach school or in the early years, tend not to be aggressive or disruptive in classroom settings or in early years settings. And so their difficulties may be missed as they may not come to practitioners' attention as having problems that need to be addressed. So what implications does this have for education or for early years practice and on children's learning and development? So here's one of the first graphs I want to show you. And this is the results of a study carried out in the Netherlands where they assessed the development of preschool children using the ages and stages questionnaires, which I think many of you will be familiar with. So these are parent-completed questionnaires assessing children's early development. And the graph shows the percentage of children with developmental delay overall on the ASQ. Looking at the right-hand side of the graph, you can see that about 5% of children born preterm born at term had developmental delay. But when we compare this with moderate and late preterm, that number is almost doubled at 8%. And amongst very preterm children, 15% of those children had developmental delay. When we show this figure now, this is the results of the same study, but separated by the 5 areas of development that are measured using the ASQ. And the important thing here is to look at the pattern of the results across all of the areas of the development. It's really very similar. So in all areas of development in the early years, the earlier children are born, the more likely they are to have difficulties or delays with their development and learning in the preschool years. In this particular study, the areas where children had most difficulties were communication, gross and fine motor development, but that can differ between different studies. When children move on to primary school, and begin to study in the reception and in the early years, we also see the same pattern of results. So this graph now shows the percentage of children who failed to get a good level of achievement on the foundation stage profile in relation to how premature they were at birth. So if we look at the right-hand side of the graph, this is the data for the full-term children, moving right down to the left-hand side for very preterm children. So this study showed that 51% of children who were born at full term failed to have a good level of achievement in the early years foundation stage, and that the earlier children were born, this increased to 66% amongst those who were born very preterm. So here we can already see the impact that gestational age is having on children's attainment that's assessed in the early years. And again, if we separate those results out across the 6 different areas of learning that were assessed with the foundation stage profile, you can see the pattern of the results is really similar across all areas of learning, but particularly pronounced in mathematics. And so already at the end of the early years foundation stage, we can see that prematurity can have an adverse impact on children's learning and their performance at school. But is this just an issue for early years? what happens to children later in life? And I've been told so many times, I think, over the years that have been carrying out the research, that it's okay, they'll catch up, that the impact of prematurity will lessen over time. And by the end of the schooling for these children, they will have caught up with their term-born peers. And I think that has been a prevailing view in education for many years. However, this isn't always the case. While some children will catch up, on average, as a group, we see that children born preterm, particularly those born very preterm, as a group don't catch up with their term-born peers. So this graph now shows, it's the same kind of graph, but it shows the percentage of children who did not achieve the expected level in English and maths at the end of Key Stage 2, so at the end of primary school, age 11. And this time, about 16% of full-term children failed to achieve the expected level in English and mathematics. And this was compared with 35% of the moderately preterm children and 39% of children born very preterm. So still at the end of primary school, we see this association between being born preterm and poorer attainment at school. And when we looked at attainment in GCSEs, we see quite a similar pattern. So this graph now shows the percentage of children who did not achieve 5 GCSEs, including in English and maths, with grades A to C, which I appreciate is the old scoring system, but that is how the exams were scored when the data were collected. And by the end of secondary school, we found that 44% of children born full term failed to achieve this level, compared with 60% of the very preterm children. By this time, the group of moderately preterm children were performing relatively similar to their term-born peers, but will have had a whole lot extra level of support in order to reach that attainment. But those very preterm children born before 32 weeks of gestation have still not caught up with their peers by the end of their GCSEs. And we also know that children born preterm are more likely to have special educational needs throughout the period of schooling than children born at term. And I think this is one of the clearest examples, this graph, of the impact of prematurity on children's long-term outcomes. So this shows the percentage of children with special educational needs in schools in Scotland in relation to how preterm they were born. And so starting with the full-term children at 40 weeks of gestation on the right-hand side, moving down to children who were born at 24 weeks of gestation on the left. And it's really the shape of this graph that's so important. As you move from the right to the left-hand side, the earlier that children are born, the higher the proportion will have special educational needs. And in this study, this equated to around 1 in 20 children born at term, 1 in 12 children born late or moderately preterm, 1 in 5 children born very preterm. And in our own national studies, we found that children who were born at the most extremely preterm gestations, 2 in 3 of those children had special educational needs by the end of primary school. So let's put it all together. What do we know now about the outcomes, the long-term outcomes of children who are born preterm? So we know that the earlier children are born, the more preterm children are born, the greater the risk for difficulties later in life. And this is a summary which shows the areas in which preterm born children may need support, particularly in the early years and throughout schooling. So we know they are more likely to have delayed motor development, including gross and fine motor development in the early years, poor hand-eye coordination or difficulties with visuospatial processing, difficulties with attention or working memory, slower processing speed, so needing a little longer to complete mental tasks, and this pattern of social and emotional difficulties, which relates to anxieties and worries and fears, difficulties also interacting with others, and particularly difficulties with mathematics when it comes to learning and performing at school. But there's one final point I also want to raise, is that prematurity can have quite a significant impact on carers and carers. And I think this we've already highlighted by Emily in her really excellent talk just before me. So we know from research that preterm birth can have a major impact on parents and carers, and that having a preterm baby can be a very stressful experience. And a preterm birth may be traumatic. Parents may be separated from their baby for an extended period of time. And actually caring for a baby in the neonatal unit as a parent may be a particularly worrying and stressful time. And that can last for many weeks or many months, depending on how early the baby is born and their need for care. And we also know that parents of preterm babies are more likely to have anxiety or depression, or in fact post-traumatic stress, than parents of term-born babies. And this can have a lasting impact on them in the long term. And as their preterm baby grows up, they may be particularly anxious or concerned or worried about their child's health and development. And in particular, if the child has difficulties, they may have multiple appointments with different health or care professionals, and they can often find it frustrating when they have to tell each new professional about their child's birth history and about their and their child's journey, because that information hasn't been shared routinely. And this can be particularly upsetting for parents, as it may trigger feelings of anxiety or depression every time they have to retell their story. And so understanding the impact of prematurity on parents and carers is really important for education professionals, not just for supporting the child, but supporting the whole family. And that sharing information both within and between settings is really important for families. And in fact, there's some quotes here you will see that are available in our training, and that parents often say one of the biggest issues that's been hard to deal with is having to repeatedly explain your baby's difficult start to life. So if we can at least reduce that pressure on parents, that would be an amazing way to support parents in the long term. So what happens to children in terms of their follow-up before they reach early years settings or while they are in early years settings? So in 2017, NICE, that's the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, recommended that babies should be followed up by neonatal services. And if they're very preterm, they should be followed up to 24 months of age and have an assessment, or up to 4 years of age if they're born extremely preterm. Most children, extremely preterm children, are not receiving a 4-year assessment, and most children are discharged at 2 years of age if they don't have severe difficulties. The problem is the kinds of difficulties these children have may emerge over the early years, and with no routine sharing of information between health and education services, it's more and more falling on the job of early years practitioners, of education services, to identify those difficulties and provide appropriate support. And that's why it's so important that early years practitioners are informed about the kinds of difficulties children might have. So what can you do as an early years practitioner? I'm not going to talk too much about this because you'll hear more about it in the rest of the webinar. But there's 3 important things you can do. You can ask about a child's birth history on admission to an early years setting to find out more about that child and their development, and also respond in a sensitive way to understand how that journey has impacted the family. You can provide training for staff in your setting in understanding the impact of preterm birth, and you'll hear more about that from my colleague Professor Gilmore shortly. And you can also attain the Smallest Things Prem Aware Award, which you're going to hear about in a few minutes. But just to finish, a couple of really important take-home messages. So I hope what I've been able to do is highlight that children born preterm are at higher risk for cognitive, attention and social emotional difficulties than children born at term, and that they are at higher risk for special educational needs or poorer attainment at school, especially in mathematics. And because these children often don't have externalizing behaviour problems, they may be overlooked and they may fall under the radar, and so their difficulties may be missed. Ultimately, early years professionals have a key role to play in identifying children's difficulties and providing support, but that support must be individual to the child. every child is different, whether they are born preterm or not. And we all know that as parents, as practitioners, that every child will have different strengths and different needs. But ultimately, prematurity is a risk factor, not a diagnosis. Being born preterm does not mean that a child will have difficulties later in life. Some children born just a couple of weeks early may have some difficulties, but some children born at 22 or 23 or 24 weeks of gestation may have no long-term problems. I really do not want anyone to leave today thinking that every preterm born child will have difficulties. They will not. It is just a risk factor. But what is important is that preterm children, they may spend 12 days, weeks or months in a neonatal unit, but there'll be a minimum of 12 years in education. And this presents a window of opportunity where you as education or early years practitioners can, with providing the right support, try and help every child achieve their full potential. And that's the end from me. I think hand over to Katrina.
Thank you, Sam. I've heard Sam speak many times, but it still really hits me just the impact that a preterm birth can have on children as they grow up and get older, and just how key our educational professionals can be to supporting not just the child as they grow up, but the whole family. Professor Johnson will be on our panel for a Q&A at the end of this webinar, so if you have specific questions for Sam about the studies and about the attainment of children as they grow older after being born preterm, then please do pop your questions in the Q&A chat. Professor Gilmore, who is just coming up now, will also be on that panel, so the same again as well. If you have questions for Camilla Gilmore with regards to the PRISM training and the development of the new early years module, then please do start popping your questions in that box now, and we'll be answering them later. So less from me, and I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Camilla Gilmore. Camilla is going to talk to us about the development of the PRISM modules, a free online training tool for educators, and really importantly, the brand new early years module that was released earlier this year. Camilla, I will hand over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here to talk a little bit about the PRISM training resource that we developed, that was really developed in response to the kinds of difficulties that we've been hearing about already this morning. And I'll also be particularly talking about our new early years module that we're so pleased to be able to share with people. But first, I just want to go back a little bit in time to before we developed the resource, because we felt it was really important to get a sense of what teachers already knew and what kinds of training teachers might have already had about preterm birth. And so we carried out a survey of nearly 600 teaching staff. And this was using a questionnaire where they saw a whole series of statements and were asked to agree or disagree with them. So, for example, one of the statements was, children born very preterm are likely to be inattentive and withdrawn. And we wanted to see how many of these statements that teachers were able to give an appropriate sort of response to. And what we found was that teachers on average scored about 15 out of 33 on this questionnaire, which suggests that they didn't have a great deal of knowledge about preterm birth and the potential difficulties that might result from this. And most worryingly, the areas where teachers on average scored the lowest were the very areas that we know that preterm children are at highest risk of difficulties. So this includes mathematics difficulties, poor social skills, and inattention. And we also asked teachers whether they'd received any kinds of training previously about preterm birth. And this graph just shows teachers and educational psychologists' responses to this question. And we can see that only just over 15% of teachers had ever received any training. And in fact, over 80% of teachers wanted more information about preterm birth and possible consequences. So on the basis of this survey, we then went and developed our e-learning training resource. And this was designed working with experts in online resource design. And it was designed for educational professionals to give them this background knowledge and understanding that they needed. And we developed it in the form of 5 different short 10-minute sections. So it's in total about an hour's worth of learning. But it was designed so that teachers could control their own learning and so could sort of dip in and out of the different sections to fit around their busy working lives. And the resource that you can see some of the pictures here from on the screen included different kinds of interactive multimedia content and quizzes to test learning so that those teachers and other professionals who use it can really come away with a sense of understanding about preterm birth. And most importantly, it includes these strategies to support children in the classroom and is designed in such a way that you can take away the strategies that you want to put into place. Now, in the original resource, there were 5 different sections. So about what is preterm birth, what does the research suggest about the possible implications for educational outcomes? Again, what the research suggests about specific areas of outcomes, including cognitive and behavioural outcomes, and social and emotional outcomes. And finally, the section that highlights different kinds of strategies to support children with different areas of difficulties. So this includes, as you've heard already this morning, inattention, working memory difficulties, slow processing speed, poor visuospatial skills, social and emotional problems, and mathematics difficulties, as they're a very high risk area of difficulty. And the resource is completely free and can be found online at this web address. Now, most importantly, we co-designed the resource with really important stakeholders who were able to bring their experience and expertise. And so this included teachers and psychologists, but also families of who had preterm born children, and also young adults who had been preterm themselves. And so this means that the resource really resonates and reflects the real life experiences of families of preterm children. And we were able to ask our young adults, what is it that you wished your teachers had known when you were at school? So after developing the resource, we then wanted to evaluate it to see whether it was effective in what we wanted to achieve. And so we carried out an evaluation study where we wanted to know, does the resource improve teachers' knowledge and confidence in supporting the learning of children born preterm? So we gave just over 60 primary school teachers 30 days to access the resource. And we measured their knowledge on the same questionnaire scale that we'd used earlier. And we found that there was a really dramatic increase in their knowledge about the possible consequences of preterm birth and the implications for education. And I'm showing here in the table some of the areas that we know are the most high risk for preterm children, and showing the accuracy on the questionnaire both before and after teachers had had access to the resource. And you can see these areas of really high risk of difficulties. There was this very big increase in teachers' knowledge and understanding. And I think most pleasingly, we found that there was a really big increase in teachers' confidence in supporting the needs of preterm children in their classroom. So the graph here shows teachers' responses to 2 different particular questions about whether they feel like they're adequately equipped to support children in the classroom, and also if they feel confident in supporting the learning of children born preterm. And you can see here both teachers reported confidence before they used the resource, after they used the resource, and then 6 months later on. And so we can see there is this big increase in their confidence and their sort of feeling of knowing how to support children, but that also this carries on some time after they've engaged with the training. And the original 5 modules of the resource were released in May 2019. And since then, we've had over 30,000 users of the resource. And we know that the resource has been used in many different ways, including as CPD for teachers and educational psychologists. It's been used as part of whole school training, and it's also been incorporated into teacher training programs. And we also know that many of the users of the resource are actually families and parents, and also healthcare workers as well. So that's where we were up until a couple of years ago. But then we felt over time that there was a need to add something new to the resource. And we'd had in particular many requests to have some more specific information focused on that early years period before children get into formal school. And so we've been working to add an additional module that focuses on this important few years. So why is it that we felt that this was so important and that we needed some specific information about the early years? Well, first of all, we know that early years education and care really sets a foundation for children's later education, both in terms of their outcomes from education, but also the way they feel about their education. So it's really critical to get support right in these early years. And also, we know that parents can be particularly worried about this period. Sam spoke earlier and gave some examples of parents' experiences more generally with preterm birth. But we also know particularly that when children first go into education and care settings, this can be particularly worrying for parents of preterm children. And also particular support may be needed when moving into settings and between settings. So moving into preschool or nursery care and then moving from there into school. And so we felt there was a need for some particular guidance and support for this period. And so the new resource has recently been launched in March this year. So again, we developed the new module with input from parents, from early years educators, and from psychologists. And it both provides information and support for practitioners, but also reflects the experience of parents. And so gives that insight into what it's like to be the parent of a preterm child entering preschool. And it includes advice separately, both for practitioners and early years settings, but also for families and parents interacting with those settings. So the different sections of the new resource include health and development in the preschool years, how preterm birth can affect parents' well-being, parent concerns about moving into education, so that early years settings and practitioners can really understand some of those worries and concerns. And then it provides some strategies and suggestions about how preschool professionals can support preterm born children in their settings and also in the transition into school. And also how parents can support preterm born children in the whole preschool period, so when they're moving into preschool settings and before. And so we're going to be hearing a little bit more shortly about some of these things that preschool settings have been able to do, and in particular hearing about some of these experiences. So that's all from me.
Thank you, Camilla. Thank you so much. And if you haven't had a look at the Prism Online learning resources, I do encourage everybody on the call to go to the website and have a look at the resources. They are freely available, and as Camilla points out, they are very easily accessible. Each module sort of taking 5 to 10 minutes, taking up to an hour to complete the training in total. I'm going to move on now to talk about the Prem Aware Award that can be awarded to schools and settings who do take steps to support children born preterm within their settings. A reminder that there will be a Q&A panel at the end of this webinar, so please do pop your questions into the Q&A chat box, and we will be ready to answer your questions before the webinar ends. share my presentation with you. And I'm just going to check if somebody can give me a shout out that they can see that presentation. That'd be really helpful.
Not yet.
Oh, it's not sharing yet. Thank you for letting me know.
Yes, we can.
Plans. There we go. Perfect. Hopefully everybody can see that now. So I introduced myself at the very beginning of this webinar, but my name is Katrina Ogilvie. I'm the founder and a director of The Smallest Things premature baby charity. In my position, I wear a number of hats. I'm also a mum of 2 children born prematurely. My first son, Sam, was born at 29 weeks. My second son, Jack, was born at 34 weeks. I came there with a background as a children's occupational therapist. I used to work in neonatal intensive care and always like to say I thought I knew what it was like for parents in neonatal intensive care until I discovered I had no idea what it was like for parents in that neonatal care journey until I was in that myself. And as a parent, I had no idea about the impact that preterm birth could have on children as they grew older. The Smallest Things is a charity really dedicated to improving the outcomes for children born preterm and supporting families in what we know really is a lasting journey. And we were delighted when the prison resources were released back in 2019 and thought what a fantastic resources they were, not just for educators, but also we discovered that parents were accessing them too. We wanted to see, well, what can we do to support children on their journey into education and into the early years setting. We've already heard this morning from our speakers about the journey that families go on, the impact in that early start in the neonatal intensive care unit, the impact on parental mental health. We also know that children born preterm are much more likely to be readmitted to hospital in the first few years of life. Many families talk to us about recurrent readmissions to hospital. That journey really doesn't end. And then suddenly, for families, it's time for their child to start school or to start an early years setting. And this is the sort of quote that we know parents experience time and time again. One mum said to us that she had a 27-weeker who is now 3 years old. She said, I really feel that nobody gets the ongoing health issues that ex-premature babies have. She talks about her age being adjusted to the corrected age when she turned 2, but she still is not on par physically or mentally to a child that was born at term. And she finished by saying, I am so nervous about sending her to a preschool in September. And I think that's what families experience. They really are worried about their child starting on that journey through education. As a charity, we really pride ourselves at putting the parent voice at the heart of everything we do. And back in early 2020, we surveyed parents, more than 250 parents responded. And over 90% of parents told us that they thought there needed to be more awareness and understanding on the educational needs of children born preterm. And astonishingly, less than half of those parents felt that their school that their child attended understood their child's learning needs. We decided to do something that would support not only children born preterm, but also families as they embarked on that journey into education. So we asked the question, why is Prem Aware so important? Prem Aware is important to improve awareness and understanding, first and foremost, of the impact that preterm birth can have on learning. And the presenters earlier today have really outlined clearly what the impact might be for a child born early. But crucially, Prem Aware is also about reassuring parents that their school or early years setting is aware of and indeed compassionate to the potential needs that their child may have. And through the Prem Aware Award and the training, it enables staff to have the skills and the knowledge to best support children born preterm within their settings and their families. And it can facilitate early identification and that timely support that is so crucial, particularly in those early years, to start improving attainment and the long-term outcomes for this cohort of children. So what is the Prem Aware Award? The best thing about the Prem Award is it's really simple, very easy to do, and we're delighted to promote the PRISM resources as part of it. So the first step to becoming a Prem Aware setting is to train your staff. So the Prem Aware Award asks senior leaders in every setting to complete the free online training and to cascade it down to all staff members. We've already heard a little bit about the PRISM resource, and again, I really strongly encourage you to have a look at that and to go through the training. It is, I know I always say this, free to access, doesn't cost you anything, but it does make a huge difference to the children and the families coming into your settings. What I particularly like is it does have real life testimonials in it, but importantly, practical strategies that you can take away and implement straight away within your setting. This is what one parent and a teacher said about the training when it first came online. She said, as a mother of a 23-week preterm child, I felt a huge sense of relief that there is finally a resource that will help educators understand the social, emotional and academic needs of my school-aged child. She went on to say that the resource was long overdue and rightly focuses on the lifelong needs of those who experience the daily challenge that a preterm birth may bring. After you've done the training, you've raised awareness and understanding of the needs that children might have. Well, how do you know which child in your setting or in your classroom may have been born preterm? Well, that's why we're asking schools and settings to have a question on their registration forms about birth history during that time before a child starts with you. And importantly, step 3, feedback. Looking at how we can continually improve and listen to parents' views and their voices on what more can be done to support them in their journey and their child who may have been born prematurely. We are delighted now, more than 200 schools and early year settings in the UK are Prem Aware, but we have a long way to go. This picture in the middle is from our 200th Prem Aware setting, and they were so proud and delighted to be number 200. Last November, we took MPs. I think we took a total of 12 MPs to Prem Aware settings within their constituency, including this photo here of the Deputy Prime Minister, to really look at how we can raise awareness and continue building momentum to support the needs of children in the lasting journey that they go on throughout the education years. We were also delighted last year to submit written evidence, but also I gave evidence in person to the House of Lords preterm birth inquiry. And that report really came out highlighting that the journey is one that can last long after leaving hospital, and went as far as commending the Prem Aware Award for improving outcomes and supporting educational settings to support families and children born preterm. They reach school age. So we're on 200 schools, or over 200 schools and early years settings right now. But our target absolutely has to be for every UK school and setting to become Prem Aware. So today we'll be asking all of you here on this webinar today to go away either to your schools, to your early year settings, back to your teams to continue raising awareness and help us on our mission to make every school in the UK and every early year setting in the UK Prem Aware to support this cohort of children. Again, there'll be time for questions at the end, so please do put them in the Q&A chat bar. But what I'd really like to do is introduce Erin now. Erin is an early years educator herself. She is a proud Smallest Things Prem Aware ambassador. and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the changes that she has made in her early years settings and the impact that that has had on families and children. I'm just going to wait for Erin to pop her camera on. I think Erin has been able to join us. Hello, Erin.
Hi, thank you so much. Shall I just start?
I was going to say, my first question, Erin, I guess, is to introduce yourself. Erin, I've introduced you as one of our Prem Aware ambassadors and an early years educator. But it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, and I guess how you found out about the smallest things in the Prem Aware Award.
Great. I'm so sorry, I'm finding it a bit hard to hear you. So can I just check that everyone can hear me okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, Erin, you sound great.
Brilliant, thank you. So thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm Erin. I have my own nursery in Bristol. So I've just dived in here because I've spent the morning in the garden with the children. So I work directly with the children and I'm the manager of my own setting. I am a qualified early years teacher. I also work a little bit for the local council, supporting other settings with children's kind of social and emotional well-being. So children's kind of well-being is really what I'm very much interested in and passionate about. And I'm also the mum of twins who arrived at 30 weeks and 4 days back in 2019. And we always knew they were going to be born early, so that element of it wasn't too much of a shock. But what was a really big shock for me was the support that was out there when that happened. So that was me. And the reason that I kind of found out about the Prem Aware Award was because when I had my twins, I was halfway through doing a master's in early childhood studies, which sounds like a completely mad thing to do. And I look back on that time and think, how did I do it? But when I went through NICU, when we'd spent our 8 weeks in NICU after my kind of maternity leave, when I went back to studying, I just had this feeling of feeling really cross that there wasn't support out there for children and families who had been through this experience. And I ended up doing my master's dissertation about kind of follow-up care for children and families after experiencing NICU. And as part of that journey, I stumbled across this amazing charity called The Smallest Things, who were doing all of the things that I was saying needed to be done. And when I found out about the Prem Aware Award, that was, you know, my parent hat and my education professional hat. It was the perfect match. And I was just so excited to find out about it because I think it's so vital. I think every single setting needs to have this award. I think every school needs to have it, but I am so delighted that the early years module has come out because I think it was a gap, and now that gap has been filled. And so the reason that I wanted to do it at my setting, there were quite a few reasons. As Camilla talked about that data with confidence for teachers, I wanted my team to feel really confident in knowing how to support children and families. And the reason that I wanted my team to feel confident supporting children and families is because I wanted any parent of a child born preterm to send their child to us with confidence, because I wanted parents to feel really safe to send their children to us. And because it's an accreditation scheme, I think it is so powerful that a parent could visit your website and see that badge and know straight away, okay, I can feel a bit more safe to send my child here. They're going to know a little bit more about what my experience might have been like, and they're going to know a little bit more about what my child might need. And when I think back to, you know, my twins are 6 now, but when I think back to when they were starting at nursery, if I'd have seen that logo, if I'd have seen that, if somebody had said that to me when I was looking around a nursery, that would have increased my confidence 1,000 times. It would have been so impactful. And I know that it is so impactful for children and families now. so we were really delighted to leap in with the PRISM training as soon as I found out about it. So my whole team did it. I did it. We're a very small setting, so it wasn't. We didn't do it so that kind of a leader did it and then fed it back. We're a very small setting, so we all did it. My staff team was so enthusiastic about it. If anyone else works in early years, you know, a lot of CPD can be a bit difficult and dry to get through, but this was so fascinating. And even for me, who was feeling a bit like I knew quite a lot about it because I had the personal experience, I'd kind of done some of my academic research about it, there was still so much that I learned, and it is so well researched, it's so evidence-based, and it is so well presented. It's really accessible. You know, your staff team can log on and do it really accessibly. You can do little bits at a time, you can dip in and out, or you can sit down and do the whole thing, because it doesn't take that long. I remember some of my key learning was the mathematics, the way that there was that kind of intersection of children's need that meant that actually mathematics could be a big area of need for some children. So that was fascinating. That was really fascinating to think about in relation to my own children and in relation to the children that I was teaching. And so that was one of the big changes that we made at work, was making sure that any children who were born preterm, we had a very kind of child-led environment, but actually any children that had been born preterm, we made sure that they were accessing really hands-on experiences of maths. You know, we're in the early years, children are learning through doing and through being really active. So we are a lot more conscious now of giving children a really strong foundation in maths and kind of knowing what the threeness of three is like. What is one, what is two, so that we know that we send them off to that maybe more abstract learning in their later education with a really strong foundation of number knowledge and of maths knowledge. I also love in the new early years module the way it's kind of the way bits of it are set out in a timeline. You know, what do you do before children start? What do you do when they're starting? What do you do when they're with you? And then that really key bit, you know, we're in June, I'm deep in transition at the moment, but what do we do when we're sending them to that next setting? What are the really core things that we need to be communicating to the school? So I really love that it covers the child's whole experience with you. And I think for my team, one of the key bits of learning, and this came alongside adapting our All About Me forms, are, you know, making sure we knew straight away very early if a child had been born preterm. And a lot of that as well came from that parent confidence. You know, telling people we were a Prem Aware setting meant that parents came to us and told us straight away and asked us about it straight away. So it wasn't something we were discovering, you know, 6 months down the line. But one of the key things I wanted my team to understand was that we might be the first place that a parent has left their child since NICU, and really understanding how holistic our support for them needs to be, that we need to support the child, but we also need to give the same amount of support to the family. So that was some really key learning, and I'm so happy that my team are really aware of that can be a very different experience for different families. And kind of thinking about transition now, it's about working with the families really carefully and making sure that the information that we share with school, they're really happy for us to share. And also, of course, sharing about the Prem Aware Award, because our ideal as an early years setting is to send them from one Prem Aware setting to a Prem Aware school, because that so many elements of that transition will be easier. And I remember when my children started school, I had to tell them, I had to really advocate for them and say, look, they were born early. I need to tell you this, because there was no place on a form to write that down anywhere. And I think for all the families who maybe don't have as much confidence to advocate, it's so important that settings have these structures in place through the Prem Aware Award, so that every family, even if they don't have that confidence to just take it to the school, have a way that they can do it without needing to be, you know, on their soapbox and telling schools about it. And my advice, I'll wrap up because I'm aware I've been talking and talking, but my advice for settings, my advice for early years settings particularly, is please do it. It is so low effort in comparison to the impact that it has. You know, I've been in this sector a long time. I've done a lot of CPD, and really the effort that you put into this. It is so easy to digest, it is so accessible, and it's free, and the impact that it has to be able to be an accredited setting is absolutely massive for staff, for children, for families, for your business. It just has so many benefits, and I really can't recommend it enough. And thank you to everyone who works so hard to make it happen, because it's a really important thing for children and families. So thank you so much for your time, and I'd better dash off now to go back to the children.
So much, Erin. Thank you for joining us, because I know you are at work today, and as you quite rightly say, you are working with your children right now, so we will let you dash off. But listening to Erin you speak, it just really reminds us of how important it is. I know certainly when I visited some of our Prem Aware settings last November, it was striking at just how proud our Prem Aware settings are of their award and what they're doing to support their children and families. So thank you to everything that you're doing, Erin, to support those families coming through. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to welcome. She's on our screen as Oscar's mum, but otherwise known as Melissa. So Melissa will introduce herself in a minute. But it's so important just listening to Erin there, her own personal experience, but also professional experience. And now listening to Melissa about her lived experience and experience of her nursery setting that Oscar goes to, becoming Prem Aware as well. So Melissa, I think we're going to be sharing your slides. Is that right?
Thank you.
Perfect.
Oh, lovely. Thanks so much, Mike. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa. I'm a Prem Aware ambassador for the Smallest Things charity, and it is a real pleasure here to talk to you about my experiences and perspective as a parent of a prematurely born child. Do excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold, but I'll try my best to speak very clearly with some sips of water. Also, my working hat is that of an inspector working at the Care Quality Commission. So I inspect mental health and community health services. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background. So a bit about our pregnancy and our birth. Medically speaking, it was quite a very uneventful pregnancy, but I started having some contractions in the morning, which my medical team thought was initially Braxton Hicks. And long story short, 5 hours later, Oscar was born via emergency C-section at 27 weeks plus 5. And we obviously know now as well that is categorized as extremely premature. So we were quickly thrown into this world of neonatal intensive care with no time to prepare. I remember thinking throughout my pregnancy that I had this book, my week-by-week book of my pregnancy, and I was always reading 3 months ahead. And I very quickly realised at birth I'd only read up to the labour stage, so had absolutely no clue what was supposed to happen now, and absolutely no idea about what was going to happen in this very unique situation. So the birth was very sudden and quite terrifying. I remember waiting quite anxiously with what people used to talk about their NHS famous tea and toast. None of this feels like how it's supposed to be. My child is not with me. My husband wasn't with me at that moment. He had gone to go and see our son. And I remember him coming up and telling me that it was good news because our son weighed over 1 kilo. Didn't feel like it was good news, but apparently it was very good news now related to his outcomes. So there was a lot of things going on for Oscar. So from the birth, following the birth, they realized he had a bleed on the brain and a pulmonary hemorrhage. And we did very much watch him fight for every breath. But he was very fragile, but he was very full of fight. The last bullet point would be quite confusing to people, but when preterm babies are born, we know that they have multiple scans on their first day of life. Oscar had his x-ray. It was about 1 in the morning. And someone said, has someone done this backwards? They carried out another x-ray and they realized actually that Oscar had organ reversal, which is actually called something called situs inversus totalis. So exactly what it means, his heart not on his left side, it was on his right, his stomach was on his opposite side, etc. So there were so many queries and concerns about this. I had never heard of this condition before. My husband is a paediatrician who came down with the consultant to explain it to me, but very again hit with not just the fact that Oscar was born preterm, but he has a condition which can have multiple add-on effects. So it can have multiple respiratory problems for children with this condition, a bit similar like cystic fibrosis. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So I did check with my husband before I shared this photo. As you can see him sleeping next to me, but I'm darting across to when we returned home. So after 73 days of being in NICU, bringing Oscar home was a moment of joy as well as deep anxiety, completely exhausted, taking in turns to occasionally have a rest where we could, as well as being Oscar, trying to mirror a lot of the things that we did in NICU, that kind of skin to skin where we could. It was really important for us to mirror as much as we could. That sense of control that you seem to lose when your child is born premature kind of is given back to you very quickly when you go home, and you're questioning, you know, am I really in charge of looking after this tiny human by myself? There's no machines here, and there's no constant reassurance, although I'm very privileged. I know that I had my husband, who is a paediatrician, which was a great piece of comfort for me at all times. But still, every cough felt critical. Every feed was a milestone. Oscar came home in October of 2021, so COVID risk was still very much there. And with winter coming and this kind of query about whether he has this respiratory condition as well, we were advised by his respiratory team to isolate. So we isolated from October 2021 to March 2022, with just having window visitors from family and friends. We learned how to manage all the medications and the medical follow-ups. I think lots of people have referenced as well. We had multiple appointments to attend to in regarding to his prematurity and his query condition. The home was really not back to normal. It was a very kind of new chapter of kind of cautious hope and kind of constant care, heavily relying on my husband, as I mentioned before, to understand all the medical language that was kind of thrown at us at every appointment, and was also consciously trying to make sure that he had an experience as a dad and it wasn't just the default medic. But I was often, very scared myself, so would go for him for kind of clarification and support on medical things that I didn't understand. And next slide, please. Thank you. It's just lovely to see these pictures again of your little one. He's 4 years old now. So play and milestones and rewriting the rule book. So we are very much development on premature time. So we focused on his corrected age, we celebrated every small step. The question before my experience as a premature parent, it sounded so simple of how old are they? And people would ask me, how old are they? In your mind, thinking, how old are they? Do we say their corrected age? Do we say their actual age? Don't want to go into the whole kind of description of the birth and the fact that he's premature. Do you just say his corrected age as if it was his actual age? Those questions do come to your mind. I very much so know that as a premature parent. The play was very gentle and intentional, focusing on lots of tummy time, sensory time, very slow and steady, and always based on Oscar's cues. Me and my husband really took kind of everything that was kind of offered to us, took it with both hands. So lots of therapy sessions, there was lots of after NICU groups. So Emily, who was on the call earlier, her predecessor, Elaine, she used to do lots of groups for NICU parents and their babies after they were discharged home. So we used to attend those groups from March 2022. So there was different topics like baby massage, play, sleep, and weaning. And I remember hearing the term wake window in that session, which framed Oscar to be a fantastic sleeper, I think, actually. Baby massage, focusing on that every day, a little bit at a time, and based on his cues as well. And it was also just a really good space to kind of meet other parents who were going through the same joys and stresses, but being able to talk about things so openly that maybe you do think a little bit more carefully about opening up to other people who haven't had the same experience. So there was a lot of love and a lot of patience throughout all of our days, a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of, hard-won milestones as well. I say that because I was very conscious about milestones. My husband was as well. He didn't give me a milestone book until Oscar turned 1. very surprised I didn't kind of chew his ear off for one before that. But I think I learned there it was just very important to teach yourself, be reflective, but also just not be hard on yourself, because your baby really just needs you and a couple of toys, and actually they can thrive and flourish. And next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, so Oscar starting nursery was very daunting, I think not just for Oscar, but for us. So he started when he was 17 months corrected. I was fortunate enough to be able to take some unpaid leave from work and return part-time. So Oscar was also going 3 days a week at nursery. It was just about 2 months after Oscar started nursery, actually, that I attended an event from my NICU, so that was Barnet General, and they actually spoke about the Smallest Things charity and the Prem Aware award, and this just kind of ticked all the boxes for me with what I was kind of going through when Oscar started nursery, and I thankfully very quickly became an ambassador for the charity. I straight away went to our nursery manager and spoke about this, and she was really keen, and her team got on it so quickly. And actually all six nurseries that are across London all did the training within about 1 month. So they're all accredited nurseries, which was fantastic. They really went straight in with it. So they created a sensory room in their baby room. They bought extra maths equipment for the preschool room. And they were just very conscious about everything that they learned on their training to make sure they embedded it for all the children there. Obviously identifying all the other children who were also born preterm, and there were multiple children, and just seeing that all the children and their families really benefited from the changes that the nursery made following their Prem Aware award. We had to do lots of navigating as well about what school year Oscar was going to be in. So he was born at the end of July instead of the end of October, and that was a journey on itself. Lots of pros and cons to the different year groups, which we didn't really know about. But ultimately making the right decision for your child. And yeah, I think just ending with the fact that premature doesn't end at discharge. It shapes childhood in very quiet, important ways. And I think for me, it's just kind of supporting him throughout his early years education. As I mentioned, he's 4 years old now, meeting him where he is, not where we think the calendar says they should be, or any book says they should be, and just champion their progress with a lot of patience and unwavering belief in their potential, but really making sure, I guess, that every setting has as much information as you can provide to them. So obviously I know Oscar's nursery is accredited, and I will be going to his school to ensure that they can be accredited as well. But thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation today.
You, Melissa. I have been lucky enough to meet Oscar in person, and I can confirm he is as cute and as adorable as he looks in his pictures. Melissa, thank you very much for sharing your own journey and your experience, and thank you also for everything that you do as a Prem Aware ambassador, really flying the flag for the smallest things and ensuring that not just your own nursery setting but others are becoming Prem Aware and supporting the needs of children born preterm. I hope you don't mind me adding Melissa as well. Melissa's husband, Edwin, wrote a blog for Father's Day, an incredibly moving blog about his experiences, not just as a father to a prematurely born son, but his experiences have been from the medical profession as well, and how that impacted him in those sort of early days in neonatal care. I would encourage you to go to our website and have a read of that too. We have a little while before the end of our webinar to take any questions. I know some of you have been putting those in the Q&A chat box. Unfortunately, we're not able to take questions live sort of over the video, so if you do have questions, please put them in there. And I know Sam and Camilla and maybe Melissa as well are ready to take questions. Fantastic. I'm going to have a look and dive in at the first one. So the first one actually is sort of could we explain, really good question, what a corrected age is? I was wondering if Sam or Camilla,
I'm happy to. So A child's age from when they're born is, of course, their chronological age, but often we might use corrected age to assess a child's development. And corrected age is essentially how old the child would be if they'd been born on their due date. So their corrected age is a little bit younger than their chronological age. And to calculate it, you just take away the number of weeks or days premature the child was born from their chronological age. So, for example, a child who is 26 months of age but was born 2 months early, their corrected age would be 24 months. And so it's helpful as early years practitioners when you're assessing the development of children who are born preterm to consider where they are in terms of both their chronological and their corrected age. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Perfectly answered. Thank you, Sam. And I think as well, Melissa touched on that. It's a really difficult question for parents to answer sometimes. Sort of that first experience of going perhaps to sort of parent and baby groups, being asked from other parents, how old is your child? And you're never really sure how to answer that question. We have had questions asking for some of the papers and references to some of the stats that you were sharing, Sam. So what we'll do is make sure those are emailed out later today to all attendees so that they've got that information. There's also been some questions around and actually a couple of questions, can other settings gain the Prem Aware award? For example, and both of these have said family hubs. I guess my answer to that is watch this space. Currently, the Prem Aware Award is just for early year settings, primary and secondary schools, but we are working with several family hubs at the moment to look at what a Prem Aware family hub would be. And I'm sure, Camilla, you would be encouraging all staff at family hubs anyway to be undertaking the PRISM training because it is there ready for staff to use.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, the training itself is there and can be accessed by anyone at any time. And it makes an important part of the Prem Aware award. But, you know, if you're waiting for that process to come through, then certainly have a look at the resource anyway and encourage other members of your staff to do so as well.
Absolutely. And anybody working within those settings, I think has already been highlighted. It's really important to share that information with families as well, because while the PRISM resources were initially set up for educators, we do know how valuable families and parents find that information. It really does give them that additional knowledge and information to be able to then advocate for their child born prematurely. Another question that does come up quite a lot, and actually it's the smallest things. We've had a number of emails over recent weeks that's come in. Sam, would be a question for you is around delaying school start. So what advice should early year settings, for example, be giving to families who are not sure whether their child is ready to start school?
So this is a really tricky question, and I think we don't absolutely know the answer to whether delaying school entry is better for prematurely born children. And it is a difficult question because often it involves parental choice and family circumstances as well. Camilla and I have done some research in the area, which is probably the best scientific evidence, and that showed that delaying preterm children's school entry didn't mean they did better than if they had gone at the right time. And actually a bit later in school, their attainment wasn't quite as good as the children who had gone at the right time. But we don't know how that plays out by the end of schooling. I think essentially, it is up to parents at the moment, but it may be better for children to be in school and supported from the earliest opportunity if they have developmental difficulties or likely to have additional learning needs. For those children who are born in the summer months, who would mean that their prematurity means they end up in school an earlier year academically than if they've been born at term, delaying entry may be helpful for those children. But I think over the years, I've come to realise that actually maybe it's more about getting schools and settings ready to support premature children. So maybe not thinking, is my child ready for school, but thinking, is the setting or the school ready for my premature child? And I think that's where the Prem Aware Award comes in, meaning when children do go to school at whatever age, they are appropriately supported. Practitioners are able to identify those difficulties, which can be hard to spot, and can put appropriate provision in from the earliest opportunity.
Thanks, Sam. And I think for that echoes actually a comment from a parent that their baby was born at 29 plus 1 weeks, and talks about actually they weren't aware of some of these difficulties that their preterm born child might have, and actually what, if they'd had the right support, what a difference it would have made to their child now growing up. And I think you're absolutely right, Sam, isn't it? It's making sure that those settings are ready to support the needs of the children coming through at the earliest possible stage. We're going to start drawing the webinar to a close. So it comes to me to say thank you to everybody who has attended this morning. We've had other comments, lots of people saying that they're going to go away and share this information with their settings, with their teams, and really, help us to support these children going forward as they come into early year settings and reach school age as well. I'd like to say a big thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to Emily, who I know has had to drop off the call, but a huge thanks to Emily for starting off today by setting the scene. To Sam and Camilla, thank you not just for presenting, but as a parent of 2 children born prematurely, thank you for all you are doing and have done to really raise awareness about the ongoing needs. To Erin and Melissa, both fabulous Prem Aware ambassadors for our charity. I also wanted to say thank you to Scott and Mike, who are the technicians from Leicester University who've been working away in the background to make sure that this event ran smoothly. So a huge thank you to both of them as well. As a charity, we always want to be improving and doing things better and making sure that we're doing the right things, and that people find these sessions useful. We will be sending out a survey a little bit later this afternoon to everybody. Please do, and I know what it's like if you get a survey to fill in, but please do, it really does help us. Please fill that survey in so that we can run more of these sessions and make sure that we're getting the right information for people. And the last thing to say is if you have any further questions or want advice on how to support children within your setting, or indeed how your setting might become Prem Aware, then please contact the Smallest Things directly. Have a look on our website, and further information will be sent out with that survey a little bit later this afternoon. So thank you again to everybody, and thank you especially to our speakers this morning. Bye everybody.